Good morning. Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me back there? All right, great. I'd like to get started. Here we have a very interesting honored alum who has a lot of really interesting things to share with us. So let's begin. I'm Scott Miller, Dean of the College of Humanities, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the BYU Alumni Association and the college to our annual Honored Alumni Lecture. This year we have the pleasure of hearing from Barry Slaughter Olsen, who received his Bachelor of Arts in Spanish in 1995. It's a pleasure to introduce Barry to you this morning. He is a veteran conference and diplomatic interpreter who has worked with world leaders and international organizations all over the world. For over 30 years, his career is centered on all things language and multilingual communication. In 2009, he co-founded Interpret America, an entity dedicated to raising the profile of interpreting. From 2007 to 22, he was a professor at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, where he taught translation and interpreting and pioneered the remote teaching and learning of interpreting. Barry has worked with some of the most innovative video and audio conferencing companies like Zoom, Kudo, BoostLingo, and ZipDX to develop remote interpreting technology, and he is the co-author of 2 patents. Barry has been interviewed by international media, CNN, CBC, MSNBC, NPR, PBS, and Wired, about interpreting and translation, and he is the executive producer of the documentary Interpreters Wanted about military interpreters in Afghanistan. He currently resides in Washington, D.C. area with his wife, Julieta. They have 2 children. His family is here with him, and I would like to invite them to stand or raise your hand for acknowledgement from the crowd. If you're related to this man, let us now all formally welcome Barry Olsen as our 2023 College of Humanities Honored Alumnus to present his lecture entitled Musings from a Life in Many Languages. Barry.
Perfect. I think we're set. Hi, everybody. Hello. How's everybody doing? Just so you know, this says it's going to be a lecture, but I do want it to be somewhat interactive. We have basically about 45 minutes, and I probably have content for 2 hours. And so I want to get the takeaways out of the way right at the beginning. First, Dean Miller, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. I am most energized when I am in front of students. I spent 15 years training interpreters and translators at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey. And I can tell you that one of the things that kept me going back all the time was students and the energy that you bring to learning and your desire to make things happen. So it is, for me to be in front of you, it's just energizing. Now, we heard the bio, but I want to just explain to you, I've spent the last 30 years more or less focused on one activity that I fell in love with when I was a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And that is interpreting. Helping other people understand one another when there is a language barrier between them. Okay, so that's where I have focused all of my energies, whether it be teaching, whether it be professional activity, whether it is in the private sector, working with technology. It's always been to help people understand one another, because I have a deep belief that when people can truly understand one another, then they can live in peace with greater ease. And so hence my desire to really work in this area, because when people understand and get to know each other, they tend to get along better, as a general rule. Now, having said all of that, it's taken me all over the world. I've lived in a number of different places. I've worked for different international organizations, governments, private sector entities, etc. So that's kind of the frame that I'm going to put around what we're going to talk about today. So just 6 takeaways that I want to leave with you today. The first, being an interpreter, you rarely have a staff position. There are staff positions out there, but most of the time you work for yourself. And if you're going to work for yourself, it takes a lot of pragmatism and flexibility as well as discipline and support from your better half to make that work. But it can be done. So as you're thinking about what it is you want to do with your life, remember that if you are really interested in doing something and you're truly, the word passionate is really overused today, but if you are passionate, if you care about something that much, you can find ways to make a living at it. But you have to be very realistic and pragmatic. Keep that in mind. Things aren't always going to be the way you want them to be, and you have to adapt to truly reach what your true goals are. Second, languages and the law of diminishing returns. I'm conflating economics with language learning. I don't know how most people feel about that, but it has always made sense to me. How many of you are studying a language? Raise your hand, up high. All right, great. Most of you here. How many of you are studying 2 languages? How many of you have a list of another 3 that you want to learn before you die? Okay, yeah, you're all humanities students. That makes total sense. There is a law in economics that says you hit a point when it doesn't matter how much more you invest in something, you're going to see the returns start to diminish. That happens with language as well. So if you're going to become truly professionally proficient in a language to make a living at it, you will need to dedicate significant time to 1, maybe 2 languages. If you're always working on that 3rd and that 4th and that 5th, you only have 24 hours in the day. And at the end of the day, you need the time to be able to focus to get to where you have a professional proficiency. Plus, you probably want to have a life, a family, and you want to serve in the church, all these other things. And so there are lots of trade-offs you have to make. So be realistic when you're looking at what you want to do with languages. Third, AI is going to change and is changing right now the language professions. I was talking with Dean Miller earlier today that we talk about translators who do written stuff, interpreters do spoken stuff. AI is radically changing the availability of good enough language access. And we're trying to figure all that out right now. But what you have to understand is that the professions are not going to disappear, but they are adapting and adapting radically. What you should remember is that you don't want to think, oh, I like doing this one thing that has to do with language, and I'm going to do that throughout my life. Because if that's what you think, you're probably going to find that that may disappear at some point. And then what are you going to do? So you need to be ready to adapt, okay? And what that's going to look like in 5 months, I honestly don't know. The cycle is speeding up so quickly that you have to be flexible and continue to learn. But what I do know is that people who truly have linguistic and cultural expertise in given languages will be able to find jobs, okay? Because that's one thing AI does not have. It doesn't think. Man, I could get off on a total tangent and we wouldn't even get to what I want to talk to you about today. But just remember, the professions are changing. You're going to have to adapt. Next, going over here, not all success is monetary. It's not. And far too often we only think about job. If there's one thing I've learned over the last 30 years, it's not all about money. You got to have enough for your needs. But if I think about the balance and what I've tried to find, the opportunity to spend time with my children, to do meaningful things, to spend time to serve in the church, and to help others and remember that it's not all about me, has been a huge part of what I consider the success that I have achieved. It's not all about what the world tells you it is. Please keep that in mind and find that balance now as your students. Living and working and serving in other cultures provides tremendous perspective. Remember that as well. Not just a mission, but maybe living in another country for a time and really understanding other cultures. And today you don't even have to go to another country. There are plenty of opportunities among many of the refugee and the immigrant communities here in the United States to get to learn different perspectives that will help open your eyes and broaden your horizons. Last thing, networking starts now. If you think that after you leave the university, oh, that's when I will start to build my network, you're too late. You should start now. The people that you're in class with, they are going to go on and do great things. Stay in touch. It will make a world of difference. If I think about the network that I have, there are so many people who have helped me along the way, and I've been able to help them. And I network because I care about them, not because I'm trying to get something from them. Okay? So those are the takeaways. So having said all of those things, hopefully you've written some of these things down. If they've resonated with you, let's get to the fun part. So what I want to do for the remaining 35 minutes that we have is I've got 7 stories that I could share with you about 7 different topics. Okay? So take a look at those and let's see who was ready to raise their hand and say, I want this one. Fear. Okay, let's go with fear. Eleanor Roosevelt said, do something that scares you every day. That does not mean go and watch a slasher movie or some kind of horror film. Nor does it mean going off and doing something irrational without counting the costs. What it means is you need to step out of your comfort zone. That's where the growth is. Got a couple of pictures up here. They are from something really scary that my wife and I did with our son Christian a few years ago. Well, actually quite a few years ago. This was back in 2003. We lived in Panama, and I was a staff interpreter for trade negotiations. They picked up the entire secretariat and moved it to Mexico in a brilliant political decision, and uprooted everyone and moved us there. Well, my wife and I decided, let's not fly. Let's drive through Central America with our 3-year-old in a car seat in the back, in a Geo Prism, which is like a Toyota Corolla. We did it. This picture right here, we were following, this is someone who went with us. He had a Land Rover Defender, and so we always sent him into the dangerous parts first to see what would happen, right? Because he had the car that could do it. And this is us crossing the Bridge of the Americas in Panama, going over the Panama Canal as we were starting our trip. This picture down here at the bottom was taken by my wife as we had to ford a river because the bridge had been knocked out and hadn't been rebuilt yet. It was like half done, you can see. And so the only way for us to get across, to continue, was to go through the river. We sent the Defender through first, it made it. And so if you can imagine, in a little 4-door Corolla, we were just like, and the water was up above the doors, right? And gratefully it didn't seep in, and we made it through. There were all sorts of scary things that happened there, right? But one of the things that I learned is that we did it. We also got stopped at multiple places in Guatemala, in Oaxaca, because there were road closures and burning tires, people on strike, all sorts of things happening. But it is one of the most memorable things that we have ever done. Now that went on, and I learned that lesson. Later on, I started to say, I want to bring people who do what I do together. How do we do that? Well, you got your network, you start talking to people. We started Interpret America. We held 6 or 7 different conferences internationally. I put the first one down on a credit card, hoping that it was going to pay off, and it did. And that fear never goes away when you're at the precipice of making a decision, but you got to face it. I put this picture here because this was a conference we did in Mexico City called Lenguas in 2019. And if you know a little bit of history, 2 weeks before there was a terrible earthquake in Mexico City. And what were we going to do? Were we going to hold it? Were we not going to hold it? We ended up deciding we were going to hold it. We didn't know if people were going to show. And we had a huge number, all of these people working in interpreting. And one of the things I'm proudest about is you'll see, if you get up close, that we have a lot of interpreters of indigenous languages in Mexico that had never been taken into account as professionals, and getting them there and putting them with people like a lot of my colleagues who work at the United Nations or work for national governments, who are standing next to important people on the news. We're all in the same room learning together. And it was one of the most satisfying moments of my career. Do something that scares you every day. This is another one. Maybe some of you have seen these videos. Wired called me up on the phone after I had been on television. Said, hey, we want to do some videos. Are you game? Scared. What if they're bad? What if all my colleagues think I've ruined the profession? What if? But I went ahead and did them. We worked really hard on them. The first 2 videos have had on YouTube well over 10 million views internationally, with all the bootleg copies that are in China and everything else with Chinese subtitles, and that we're probably at least double that. A lot of people know about the profession because I did something that scared me. And this was the last one I wanted to say about being scared. Getting together with a veteran combat videographer to help support and find a way to finance an amazing film that I hope all of you will have the chance to see in Utah Valley in January of next year. It's called Interpreters Wanted, about all of the interpreters who were left behind when the United States pulled out of Afghanistan. It's a moving, moving film, and I hope you get a chance to see it. Again, I'm not rich. We're not going to be rich from making this, but we're helping tell a story. Okay? So that's fear. Now we're going to go back. I have to hit this button. Next. Got another one? Anyone, please? Yes?
Can we do decide and listen?
Decide and listen. Okay. So you'll see that I've got a scripture there where it says, you must study it out in your mind, then you must ask me. I copied it from the scriptures on the church website, and that's a footnote. So it's ask me if it be right. Sorry about that, I missed it. Decide and listen. Okay. Shortly after the terrorist attacks of 9/11 in 2001, I was working in Washington, D.C. as an interpreter. The State Department was one of my main clients. The day of the attacks, I was working at the State Department main building, and it was crazy, right? A lady comes running down the hallway while we were watching on television that one of the Twin Towers was on fire. And she screams, we're under attack, evacuate the building. It was chaos. Anyway, I was able to get home that day, and, everything changed. And a couple of months later, I received an offer to take a staff position in Panama City for these trade negotiations that were going on in the Western Hemisphere. And I flew down, I interviewed with them, did everything that I needed to do, took my exams, and they offered me a position. And they gave me, I think it was 24, 48 hours to decide if I was going to take it or not. So, dutifully, Julieta, my wife, and I took the time to think about what we were going to do. We weighed all the pros and cons. We looked at everything. We had just purchased our first home. And I reached the decision like, why am I doing this? Why am I going to uproot my family and walk away from what is a great career that's going pretty darn well? And so we made the decision. I went to bed, decided, I'm going to let them know tomorrow. I got up the next day. I had a job with a client in southwest DC, and it was right on the river where I was. It's a military base, and during lunch, the whole day, I couldn't think straight that entire time. And I went out, and here's where I'm going to try and not get emotional because I'm an emotional guy, but I'm going to do my best not to. I came out at lunch, and I was walking. I was right on the Potomac River. Thinking, I don't feel good. And so I called my wife, and I said, honey, I can't think straight. Something just doesn't feel right. Told you I was going to get on top of it. There we go. My wife, in her infinite wisdom, said, I'm getting a babysitter. As soon as you get home, we're going to the temple tonight. I love being able to talk here at Brigham Young University because I can bring all of the aspects of who I am together. And that matters. Long story short, we went to the temple. I came out. My wife and I didn't talk when we were there. You know, we just were together. But as we finished our session and we changed, we came out, I looked at her, she looked at me, and we both said, we're going to Panama. And that was it. Decide and listen. Too often we want the Lord to tell us what we're supposed to do, or we want a professor to tell us what we're supposed to do, or a parent to tell us what we're supposed to do, because it's scary to make those decisions. But the pattern is very clear. We are agents unto ourselves, and we make our decisions. And if it's off, the Lord's going to let you know. Listen and decide. The decision that we made radically changed our life and changed it for the better. I can't get into all the particulars, but I can tell you it was the right decision. Thank you for choosing that one. All right, next. We've got more. Don't hold back. Yes?
We do adapt and act.
Adapt and act. Yes. This is another fun one. This is a more recent one. All right. So, I returned from our time in Latin America in 2005. We moved back to DC and I started working again as an interpreter. And it was the first time I saw telepresence by Cisco. I don't know if any of you have ever heard it. It was when they had these big 1080p screens around a table to make it look like you were having a meeting with people who could be on the other side of the planet. And I saw that and I said, this is going to radically change what I do for a living. I talked to a lot of my colleagues about it in DC, and they're like, yeah, maybe, I don't know. And I realized that I really cared about that, and I cared about the technology. Fast forward, I took a position at the Middlebury Institute in 2007, and I started doing most of my interpreting work in Silicon Valley. Again, in these situations where I saw video conferencing technology being used. And I slowly saw all of the elements converge to make it possible to build a multilingual video conferencing platform. The big platforms wouldn't give me the time of day, and I tried. Zoom did. This is when they were small. This is pre-pandemic. And I went and talked to the CEO, and we sat down and talked for an hour about what could be built. And he said, Barry, you're our guy. Let's make it happen. Took another year. I got assigned to work with a team there, and we were able to build some things out. And then they announced they were going to release it. And I'm like, it's not ready. Don't do that yet. But that's what they do in Silicon Valley. You minimum viable product, push it out there, let people break it, make some people upset, tweak it, make it a little bit better, and iterate. So that happened in 2018, right? And so I had hoped to maybe work for them. They ended up saying, no, thank you. Things moved on. But suffice it to say, I was able to push and get that thing built and convince them that it made sense. Oddly enough, I worked previous to that with another small company that worked in audio conferencing, and that's where we got our 2 patents for multi-channel audio for these kind of video conferences, right? Shortly, that was, I guess, about 2 years after we had done what we had done with Zoom, I get a call from another company called Kudo. CEO says, hey, I want to hire you. I said, okay. Again, scare yourself. Do something. It seemed like the right time. And I worked for Kudo for a couple of years, helping them build out their platform and helping them also build out a marketplace that makes it possible to connect talent all over the world for these virtual meetings, right? Now, I share all of this with you, right, for adapt and act. I had to adapt every step of the way, and things didn't turn out the way I wanted them to. I wanted to be working for Zoom, but it didn't happen. Let me share one other story with you just quickly associated with this. I was a little upset. Wasn't necessarily happy with how things had turned out with Zoom, right? I was glad that the technology was out there. It wasn't in the form that I wanted it to be, but at least we got something built. The pandemic hit. Suddenly, all of the international organizations and others that needed to continue their activities, right? We're talking World Health Organization, the UN family, national governments, school districts, courts, you name it. We're trying to figure out how do they continue when they have these language needs virtually. Gratefully, there were tools out there. Now, I continued sometimes a little grumbly about what had happened when I worked with Zoom, because it didn't happen the way I wanted it to. Well, one day during the pandemic, I get a call from, I can't remember, it was like the regional representative's office of North America, Northeast, I can't remember who it was, said, we need interpreters, as the church does. They find volunteers and bring people together. Said, but we're going to be doing this on Zoom. Are you familiar with that technology? I was like, yeah. And I was saying, what I want to say is, well, you bet I built it. But I realized that doesn't make any sense. And this guy really didn't matter to him. And so finally, as I continued to be kind of grumbly about this, largely to myself and to my poor wife who had to listen to it, I had one of those moments when, an idea comes into your head and it says, look, there's a reason that this technology needed to happen when it did, and it happened. And look at what it's being used for today. When I saw the way that church leaders were using the technology to be able to communicate with people all over the world, I said, yeah, remember, not all success is monetary. You have to adapt. Things aren't always going to work out the way you want. All right, we're doing pretty well. Let's go to another story. Yes? Your worst critic. Okay. I've got a quote here from Brené Brown. If you're familiar with who she is, she's professor out of Texas, focuses a lot on shame studies, has some really good TED Talks and whatnot. I've read a couple of her books. But she says, shame is the gremlin that says, you're not good enough. So let's talk about that. Who's your worst critic? To be honest, I think most of the time it's us. Or as Brené Brown says, the gremlins inside that are constantly telling us that we are not enough, right? This is a picture of the Inter-American Development Bank. The Inter-American Development Bank is in Washington, D.C. It's one of a series of development banks all over the world. This is a regional one. The World Bank is probably the largest development bank in the world. They cover everywhere. You've got the African Development Bank and others that are out there. And they, of course, have official languages. So they need interpreters. I had worked really hard to get onto the roster of the Inter-American Development Bank early in my career. It was hard. They do really interesting and sometimes extremely technical stuff around finance. So I got my first job. I was super excited. And it was all about legal systems in Latin America. And I was working with an interpreter who's an exceptionally good interpreter. He was extremely helpful. He's also a lawyer, one of those people with multiple degrees. And he had been quite helpful that day, and it was rough. It was difficult. Well, one time he had stepped out, and mind you, this was my maiden voyage at this organization, and I have to interpret a justice of the Supreme Court of Mexico, who was talking about, all I can remember from that day was that he kept saying res judicata, which is la cosa juzgada in Spanish. I knew that, and so I kept saying res judicata as I'm trying to follow what he was saying. It was so hard, it was so dense, it was so fast, and I was just hanging on You can't do this. Why do you even think you can be here? Oh, they're never going to call you back after this. I'm sure that everybody in that room is getting up to complain because you're doing such a bad job. And I'm having this internal conversation with myself as I'm struggling doing something that is extremely difficult and has a huge cognitive load, which is a bad idea, but I couldn't stop. One of the staff interpreters came in, a wonderful lady from Bolivia that I got to know over the years, has since passed away. She came in, sat down, wrote something down on a notepad next to me. I was so focused, I couldn't even look at her. But as I saw she was writing something down, I said, I already know what that says. It says, you're done. We've had complaints, go home. You can't work here. I was convinced that that's what the note said. I finished, I turned off the microphone. Barbara, the lady, couldn't stay, so she had to step out, and she had since left. And I grabbed that notepad and I looked over at it because I was scared to death to see what it said. And she says, Barry, so glad to see you here. Welcome to the IDB. Barbara. Don't be your worst critic. Have faith in yourself and in your abilities. When you have put in the work, you will be able to do things that you may not think you can. Trust yourself. All right, I think we've got time. Ooh, we're doing really well. Got a few more, come on. Do you remember which ones we have done and we haven't? Yes? Stereotypes. Oh, this is a fun one. All right, so this is me at a younger age. You can see I had some brown hair left. This was actually back, about a month and a half before 9/11, actually, in 2001. This is when I was working on a counterpart visit with the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of National Defense of Mexico. We're out on the parade grounds of the Pentagon. Stereotypes. When you think of a translator or an interpreter, and I don't want you to blurt it out, but I just want you to think about this for a moment. Who do you think, who comes into your mind? What does that person look like? Probably not like me, right? Most people in the English-speaking world consider interpreters or translators to be people who have a thick foreign accent and are probably not from the United States. Well, on one occasion when I was doing my job, I was working with a cabinet level leader of the United States at a job. And early in the morning, I showed up, talked to a couple of his handlers, and when the time came for me to introduce myself, because I was going to be working with this person for 2 days, walked up and said, good morning, Mr. Secretary, I will be your interpreter today. He looked at me literally like this. And with 100% honesty in his voice, he leaned over to me and he said, are you sure you can do this? Now, I knew there was no malice in it. I just knew that I did not fit his stereotype. I looked over at him and I said, I assure you, Mr. Secretary, I know what I'm doing. And left it at that. Went on and worked for those 2 days. Be careful with stereotypes. Stereotypes can be helpful to help us understand the world in very broad brushstrokes. But don't let stereotypes shade the way you look at individuals. Everyone is unique. And since we're at BYU, I'm going to say everyone is a child of God. Doesn't matter what they believe, where they're from, how they dress. Just doesn't matter. Give everyone the opportunity to show who they are. You'll be a better person for it. All right, that's stereotypes. All right, we've done fear, stereotypes, your worst critic, decide and listen, adapt and act. I think we've got remembrance and dress the part left. Any preference? Yes? Dress the part. Okay, this is a fun one. All right, let's go back to April 14th, 2009. I was hired to be one of a team of many interpreters working in Portuguese, French, Spanish, and English for the Summit of the Americas. The Summit of the Americas is the presidential level summit that happens, I believe it's every 3 years. There was one last year in Los Angeles hosted by the United States. This one, the 5th, was hosted by Trinidad and Tobago, which are a couple of islands off the coast of Venezuela. Beautiful, beautiful place. Small country. They didn't have enough hotels to be able to receive all of the delegates and everything. I remember flying into the airport, and when I flew out a little early, all of the presidential jets were at that airport, and there was Air Force One was there, Obama was there, you had all of the presidents from the different countries, and just they had a hard time finding places for all of the planes, right? Well, I got to this job, we were doing different things. They kept us kind of in a holding tank because they brought in 2 cruise ships because they didn't have enough hotel space for everyone. And so I ended up staying on a Carnival cruise ship. I've never been on a cruise, but I've stayed on a cruise ship. And then they had different venues. And one of the venues was this big auditorium, probably about 3 times this one, where the Secretary of State and the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the different countries were going to have a forum to talk to civil society, if I remember correctly. So we were in this little holding area in another building not far from the ships, waiting for our assignments. And the head of interpreting comes running in and he's like, Barry, you, we need to be at this meeting. It's going to start in 5 minutes. So we run, get in the car, they drive us down to the ship. And you can imagine when it's a presidential summit, there are multiple filters of security, right? And you don't just get in. You have to go through it, and that includes interpreters. Even if you have the right badge and everything else, it takes time, and they're going to check you, and their dogs will sniff you, and all of that. Well, we get there. We get out. The head of interpreting is out in front of us. I'm walking with my booth partner and a couple of others, and we get out of that van just with purpose. And we're striding right to the security checkpoint. The security people look at us. And they just go! They didn't check our bags. They didn't check anything. We didn't have to go through the magnetometer. We get to the next level when we're getting on the ship. There's go, sir, go. And they're just opening up. And people are going in front. It's moving and opening up the way for us so that we can get to this meeting. And we got there, we sat down in our booths, and we went to work. After the meeting, I see the coordinator of interpreting services, and he says, Barry, did you notice how we got right through security? I'm like, yeah. I thought that was you because we had to be up there so that the meeting could start. And he just burst out laughing. He said, no, they thought you were the Secretary of Foreign Affairs of Canada. And we've laughed at that ever since. Now, what do I say when I would dress the part? I dressed the part. Know where you are going and dress the part. Don't think, that's not my style. I don't want to dress that way. We need to know what is expected, and we need to make sure that we can meet those expectations. Okay? In this case, it was really good. Got us through security very quickly. But you need to make sure that you understand those things. Sometimes you think, that's just not my jam, or however my daughter would say it. We need to understand what's appropriate for the situation and prepare for that. And if we do it, things are likely to go much better. All right. So we've got just about 7 minutes. You guys have been awesome. Let's go ahead and go with Remembrance, which was the first one. Little scripture here, obviously, from John 14:26. But the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, he shall teach you all things and bring all things to your remembrance. I would just like to submit to you that does not mean just spiritual stuff. If you remember, we are taught that all things are spiritual unto God. All things. That means your aspirations, what you want to do with your life, your career, your family. It matters. because he is a loving God who cares about us. Okay? Now I put some pictures up here because this gives you an idea of the kind of stuff that diplomatic interpreters do. You accompany people and you help them understand what's going on, right? A lot of the same stuff. You can see the suit matters. And yes, I did have some pretty dark hair early on in my career. And these are from different events and different people in different suits from different countries. But it's not what I wanted to, I just wanted that up there so you had an idea of kind of what the work conditions are like. I bring Remembrance up because this was my first overseas assignment with a high-ranking government official of the United States. And I was super excited, hadn't been out of grad school very long. The head of the interpreting service at the State Department had, put a lot of faith in me and said, "Oh, Barry, you can do this, right?" I'm like, yeah. As you learned, I still had a few issues with those gremlins, right? Initially in my career, wondering if I was good enough. Well, I got on the plane, flew down to Miami, then we flew to the country where we were headed. I get there, and I had on just a shirt that didn't have a collar for a tie. I had a sport coat and some slacks and some shoes that I had worn on the flight. We get there, and I find out that my luggage had gone to Cartagena, Colombia, and we weren't in Colombia. I had no clothes. I'm like, oh, well, maybe it'll come tomorrow. I got up in the morning, went down, presented, I went and introduced myself to the head of the U.S. operations there, and said, "Oh, Mr. Olsen, good morning. So good to see you here." She handed me the schedule. I looked at it. 30 minutes, we were off to the presidential palace, and we were going to be meeting with the president of the country. I looked at her and I said, "I don't have any luggage. I only have these clothes here." She immediately lined up like 3 guys that were more or less my size. And she said, "Okay, do you have a clean white shirt and a tie?" "Do you?" "Yes." "Go get it." Put it on. So what did I do? I put on borrowed clothes. And for my very first high-level assignment overseas, I was going to be wearing borrowed clothes at a presidential palace. Right? It worked out. The suit and tie, the tie and the shirt went with my sport coat, and so I was okay. Went through there. We had our initial meeting, did my work. They went and showed us a few things, did my work there. And then I thought we were all done. I thought we were headed back to the cars, and they take us to these double doors, and they open them. And it is a big room about the size of this, full with cameras and with reporters and everything, and it was going to be a press conference. My heart sunk. Right? And I remember that when that was there, I thought, my voice changed in my head, and I was like, "Barry, you've been trained. You know how to do this. Right now it is sink or swim. Have faith and go to work." So we were up there on the dais, and I got up and I assessed the situation based on everything I had been taught in my classes. And I looked over at the government official that I was working with, and I said, "Mr. Administrator, this is how I think it's best for us to work." I was going to do some whisper interpreting while the questions were coming in, and then do consecutive out so that they could record it on the microphones. He says, "That sounds good." And we went through it. I was there. And what I realized at that moment is that government official didn't speak any Spanish. And he was relying 100% on me to help him fulfill his responsibilities and to look good. And when I understood that it wasn't about me, it wasn't about whether I'm good enough or not, whether people think I have good this or that, it was about me being able to contribute with my talents and abilities to help him be successful and that the mission be successful. And when that happened, everything was there. I was able to remember what was said, and we finished up, came out of there, and he said, "Thank you so much." Also, at a later event that night, I ended up dancing merengue for him because he did not want to go out and dance, and he appreciated that as well. But You can learn. You've gathered a lot of information, and the time for application is coming. Don't be afraid. Nobody is expecting you to be perfect. They are expecting you to be competent, okay? And to be willing to learn when you do make mistakes. That's what it's all about. That's how you get better. I know that I've been able to remember things. I know that I have been totally on point and been able to function in extremely stressful situations. Because one, I put in the work, but I also knew that I had the support of a loving Heavenly Father. And that the Spirit is there to help bring all things to our remembrance. And a memory for an interpreter is a big thing. So, we've been able to cover all of them. I think we've got like 2 minutes before we've got to cut off, correct? So let me just try and... we've got all of those, so I'll go back to there just to have it up there. You are so amazingly privileged as students of this university. I hope you appreciate it on a daily basis and that you're putting forth your best effort. If you're struggling, it's normal. It happens. You're going to be able to do great things. I never, in my wildest dreams, thought that I would end up doing the things that I have been able to do in my profession. But when you do the work and you put in the effort and you try to seek that guidance, you seek that guidance when you need it, and you're ready to accept course correction when you're going to make a mistake, you're going to be not only okay, but you're going to be able to do great things. Thank you for giving me this hour of your time. I hope it's been well used. I hope you feel like you've been fed a little bit and that you leave excited about some of the things that you've heard. I'm going to be in classes, a couple of classes tomorrow. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to being on campus. Thank you. You've been a wonderful audience, and good luck with all you're doing.
Thank you so much for that. We're so proud of you as an alum. There's a class in here at noon, so I'll invite you to get out as quickly as we can. Maybe take a few questions in the hallway out there.